2020 virtual Peter Mac Research Student Open Day.
Just wait a minute. Wait for people to join. Now go now.
Okay, so welcome to our 2020 virtual Peter Mac Research Student Open Day. So my name is Dr. Erica Cretney and I'm the Acting Research Education Manager. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we each meet today. For myself, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So our Student Open Day is very different this year compared to other years. So typically we bring students into our building, we run a bit of a tour through the research laboratories and then a mixer session where students can chat with supervisors and look at posters and talk about the research. But obviously that wasn't going to happen this year. So we worked really closely with our research student committee to develop this virtual event, and we hope that you can really make best use of that. If you haven't already had the chance to jump onto our website, please ensure that you do. You can access a virtual tour, you can watch student videos, and you can also jump on and have a bit of a look at the various supervisor videos. But tonight you have an opportunity to drop in at the various Zoom drop-in sessions and chat to the supervisors. So now as we start, I'd like to welcome to you our Executive Director of Cancer Research at Peter Mac and also the head of the Sir Peter MacCallum Department of Oncology, Professor Ricky Johnstone.
Hello, lovely to be here. It's interesting times that, you know, we haven't got the usual sort of open day that we would otherwise have. But it's fantastic that we have already more than 80 attendees at the virtual student day here at Peter Mac, and kudos to Erica and the team for putting this on. Now, Erica, do you want me to go straight into my slides now?
Yeah, you go into your slides now and then followed by me.
Okay, I think you just have to stop sharing, Erica, and then I can jump in.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so I thought I'd start with a little bit of background on Peter Mac, what we are for those that don't know, and the research enterprise here at Peter Mac, because it really is quite a different environment to many of the MRIs and the universities that you as students might have been looking at for places in 2021. So, Peter Mac's been around now for more than 70 years, and it was established in 1949 by Sir Peter MacCallum and Dr. Rutherford K. Scott, who with the Victorian government set up the very first dedicated cancer centre. And it was really probably focused more around radiation therapy at the time, but now has extended out to the full suite of activities. And it's really interesting that the vision and the quote from Sir Peter was that this cancer centre would be unsurpassed in the world, where humanity, caring service and relentless research share equal value. Nothing but the best is good enough in the treatment of cancer. And so if you think about 70 years ago, where this was really a model of research-driven clinical care, was driven by Sir Peter MacCallum, and that holds true to today. And so research really does have an equal footing and equal value within this organisation. It's different to any other hospital that you would find in Australia. No hospital has anything like the research workforce that we have. But in the US and in Europe, these sorts of comprehensive cancer centres are quite commonplace actually. And we model ourselves on, you know, the very best cancer centres in the world. The MD Andersons, the Memorial Sloan Ketterings, the Dana-Farber's, the Gustave Roussys, those are the sort of places that Peter Mac pitches itself to. So if you come here and do a PhD or an honours or a master's, if you've got any sort of education role here at Peter Mac, we're pitching ourselves at the very highest international level. So where are we in Melbourne? And for those that haven't seen where we are and know where we are, we're in the north of Melbourne, I guess. This is actually was called Sydney Road, so that was the road leading from Melbourne to Sydney, and this is the Haymarket roundabout where travellers used to gather their goods and supplies before they headed off to Sydney along this road. The University of Melbourne is placed over here. There's a very large hospital called Royal Melbourne Hospital here, and the Royal Women's Hospital with the Royal Children's Hospital down the road. But Peter Mac sits here in this brand new building that is now 4 years old. And we're surrounded by other like institutions. There's the Doherty Institute for Infectious Disease and Immunity. There's the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute and Bio21. So it really is a beautiful and a fantastic precinct in which to conduct medical research. We have just what is quite simply a gorgeous, beautiful building and environment to work in. So a little bit of background on what Peter Mac is and what we do. Over this period, over a couple of years, we had 70,000 patients come through, about close to 200,000 appointments, what's called inpatient separation. So these are activities with patients. So the total staff number of Peter Mac, pardon me, is around about 2,700, of which a little under a quarter of which, around a quarter of which is researchers. So it's a significant part of the entire enterprise. At any one time, we've got more than 200 clinical trials being undertaken. There are more than 40 laboratories in the laboratory research space, and we publish more than 700 papers every year. And our research budget is actually beyond this. It's probably close to $100 million per annum. So what does research at Peter Mac look like? Well, it's probably got enough for everyone. Whether you're interested in very fundamental science and discovery-based science that could be around any of these particular areas. Some of them might be around particular tumour types and tumour streams like haematology. Others may have a focus on genetics and genomics or metabolism or immunology. I think you will find a full breadth of projects in the laboratory space leading out into the translational space. In clinical research, of course, it's our trials portfolio, but more than that, we have this health services research and implementation sciences portfolio, where we're looking at the impact of what we're doing, and we're measuring that in the real world in real time. So this is what you'd expect to find in the Comprehensive Cancer Centre. Everything from discovery science, translating those findings into clinical utilisation and testing, then to standard clinical care, and then determining what the impact of that research-driven clinical care is, what the impact is on the individual patient, what the impact is on the community, and what the financial impact is as well. So they're the sorts of metrics that we measure. And if you'd like to be a student here at Peter Mac, then, and if any of those areas takes your fancy, you will find a project that will suit you, because we've got that breadth of study. We pride ourselves on having fantastic facilities, state-of-the-art facilities in microscopy, flow cytometry, various genomics technologies, and other omics type technologies, including functional genomics, so using CRISPR and RNAi to interrogate the full genomes. We've got large-scale computing and bioinformatics. We have all the services that you can imagine through the Media Kitchen and lab services, and a fantastic tissue bank where primary samples from patients are available for us to conduct our work, obviously under the right ethics guidelines and governance. So why study at Peter Mac? Why might you think about having a career here? And I certainly hope that you are considering having a career here at Peter Mac. Well, I think that you'll have an opportunity to learn from some of the very best researchers, scientists, clinicians in the world. We pride ourselves on benchmarking ourselves at an international level, and you will find people here who are the very best in their area of expertise. There are projects that are provided that we believe are exciting, will have impact, and will be challenging. We're not interested in Me Too science. We're not interested in making incremental discoveries and incremental increases in knowledge. We want to publish our work in the very top journals and to have the most impact that we can possibly have. So we'll put together challenging projects because we know the type of people that we are attracting want that challenge. That's what they're looking for, and that's what we want to offer. As I said, we've got fantastic technologies and great resources. There's nothing that you really can't do here on site or through our collaborative networks through the University of Melbourne and other sites around the Parkville precinct. We will guide you as you go through your student journey. We know that certainly when you start off out at honours, it's jumping into the unknown. It's a completely different way of learning and a different way of conducting yourself. Research is, it can be tough. And so, you need that sort of mentorship and guidance as you go through and develop your own career. And we're very much into, developing all of our students to be future leaders. And that's our aim, is that when you leave Peter Mac, you've got a wealth of knowledge, you've got a fantastic CV, and you are well prepared for the next step in your career, and that you're going to be part of a very strong Peter Mac alumni. We base everything around that vision that I mentioned from Sir Peter McKellen himself, around this research-driven clinical care, and that everything we do is to have impact and to be for the betterment of our stakeholders in our community. And so you live and breathe that here. You come in the morning and you know why you're coming into this environment. You know what's at stake, and you know that the impact that you can make is profound. And that's the last point, really. The opportunity to enhance the health and well-being of the community. It gives you great pride when you tell people that you work or study at Peter Mac, and there's this instant recognition. Oh, Peter Mac, I knew someone who went there, and they had great care, they had great outcome. They got the very best in the world. And to be part of that community, I think, is something that we take very seriously and really does give you a terrific sense of purpose. So I'll hand back to Erica in a second. She'll provide you with a lot more information about the intricacies of student life here at Peter Mac. And then we have opportunities for you to go in and talk to the researchers themselves about the projects that are available next year. I'll give you a little plug. I have 2 in my laboratory that will be available, and we're looking forward to bolstering the laboratory workforce next year. But I think that you will find that there is a wealth of opportunity here, and we really look forward to you joining us in 2021. With that, I'll stop and hand over to you, Erica.
Okay, thank you, Ricky. So I might just, we're starting to see some questions flowing in, but we might leave those until after we've given this next introductory session. And then I also have here on the panel, we have Associate Professor Caroline Owen, who's the Director of the Office of Cancer Education and Development. She's a wealth of education knowledge, and so she'll be able to be on hand and assist with answering those, but we might wait until the next lot of slides have come through. We also have our Research Education Officer, Naranga Nawagamua, who's going to keep an eye on Menti for those questions that are coming through. So I'm now just going to share my screen that I did have some difficulties with. So you're not going to see the full screen, so I do apologise, because I'm sharing from a remote desktop working from home. Hopefully you can see the majority of the screen there. So as a student working at Peter Mac, you'll be sure that you're working in a world-class research, education program and facility. So we host a variety of projects, basic translational and clinical research. The majority of our students are enrolled through the University of Melbourne, but we do have many who are enrolled through other organisations, universities, national and international. We have a really large student cohort, so over 160 students who are undertaking courses such as honours all the way through to the PhDs. Where do our students come from? So our students are from national and international universities, so anywhere from China all the way through to various parts of Europe, South America, New Zealand and others. So our education program is a structured program in the sense that we fulfill all of the university requirements, but at the same time there's flexibility to meet varied needs. So obviously we have a really diverse student cohort, so the training needs of our more junior researchers are quite different to our more senior students who are looking more at that professional development side of things. We also have a large number of clinician students, so they have different education and training needs as well. But certainly for all of our students, you're going to ensure that you're being you're working with talented and committed people. All of our postgrad students have the opportunity to be mentored throughout candidature by one of our senior researchers. We have state-of-the-art facilities and support, and obviously you're going to be expanding your research knowledge in light of those really rapidly changing technologies that are used in medical research. So resources, so Peter Mac platform technologies really underpin all of the research that we do. So we're talking about things like the Victorian Centre for Functional Genomics, molecular genomics, flow cytometry, bioinformatics. The actual education program itself, so we've already spoken a little bit about fulfilling the university requirements, but also we run progress reviews. We have multidisciplinary student committee panels that will really help to nurture each of our students all the way through candidature through to the submission stage. I've already spoken a little bit about our platform technologies. We run a variety of workshops to support our students, anything from networking, leadership, we run thesis boot camps, journal writing skills, and a variety of other types of workshops for our students. So the Peter Mac PhD program for many years has really been seen as the gold standard. And so that was so much so that in 2017, we were able to open up our own PhD program more widely to other cancer organisations, or rather organisations that had cancer-related PhD students in them. So we now run the Comprehensive Cancer PhD program. All of our Peter Mac PhD program, PhD students participate in this program, but it's also open to cancer-related PhD students who work in the 10 different BCCC partner organisations. So these include organisations like Melbourne Uni, the Children's Hospital, the Women's, St Vincent's, WeHive, and others. So this is just a really great opportunity for all of our cancer-related PhD students to be able to start networking with their other cancer PhD peers that are working throughout Melbourne. So it's a great opportunity to bring everybody together. We run events such as a grand debate, a student symposium. Last year that was held at the zoo. We plan to run it at the aquarium this year, but obviously that didn't happen. We run a different seminar series. We run a chat with a Nobel laureate session. So lots of really great events and really great opportunities to network with people that may be your peers and moving into the future leaders in cancer research. So how do you become a student? So obviously key is meeting the university degree eligibility and inquiry requirements. Often the hardest thing is finding a project and a supervisor, someone who'll be willing to take you into their laboratory. So look through the project booklet that's on our website that we've already spoken about. Often those projects are just a bit of a starting point, a bit of a broad idea of the types of projects that are available. You'll find that when you speak to the supervisors about your own interests, sometimes they might be able to tailor a project that suits your particular interests. So use that as a bit of a starting point when you're chatting to the various supervisors about projects. Ultimately, you'll end up hopefully meeting with the potential supervisors to discuss the project. Tonight is just the first opportunity to touch base with a number of different supervisors, see who you find some kind of affinity with. And when restrictions ease, we hope that you'll be able to visit the lab and meet others in the research group. And typically, the supervisors will want to see a copy of your transcript from the university. We do have an expectation that all of our postgraduate students do have their own scholarships. And so supervisors are going to want to have a look at your marks to see whether there is a chance that you will be able to obtain a scholarship. So postgrad students, so as I've mentioned, the entry to the Peter Mac program is based on project availability, student suitability, and academic background. Chat with the supervisors, as we've already said. If you meet the eligibility requirements, so for a PhD at Melbourne Uni, it's considered that H1 is required for basic entry. So H1 at Melbourne Uni is considered 80 plus, but those marks, they look at your honours year and your penultimate year, but ultimately scores in the high 80s are required for scholarships that I've mentioned. Supervisors will be having that expectation from you. So apply for candidature and scholarships through Melbourne Uni, the Sir Peter MacCallum Department of Oncology, or if you prefer to undertake your program through a different university, enroll through a uni program that will allow you and approve for you to do your project placement at Peter Mac. Importantly, the 31st of October is the round 1 deadline for scholarships. It's really important to get your applications in by this date because the majority of scholarships are awarded in the first and second rounds. Honours and Masters students, the procedure is a little bit different. Enroll in your degree at the university and then get uni approval to do your project off campus at Peter Mac. And then you'll go on and do the coursework in your university department. So the majority of our honours students, for example, are enrolled through the Department of Clinical Pathology or through the Biochemistry department. So we have students at doing their coursework through the different departments. And we do have honours students who are also participating through other departments as well. So they'll be doing different coursework at different times through their honours year. So again, the procedure is apply for candidature at the uni, meet the requirements, and then apply for projects through the uni preference database. Being a student, so as I've already mentioned, we have a really large student cohort at Peter Mac. Not only are you going to be mentored by fellow staff, you'll also be mentored by the other students who are in your cohort. All of our students have great opportunities to attend conferences locally, but also internationally. All of our PhD students are given a sum of $5,000 that they're able to spend through candidature on a computer, but also can be used later to undertake conference travel, which is a really great opportunity. You can be involved hospital-wide, so outreach type activities, running school tours and donor type activities. We run student events such as our student retreat, which is 2 days worth of workshops that we run off-site. So last year it was run at Yarra Valley, in the Yarra Valley, and we've run it in other sites as well. And I've already mentioned to you the Comprehensive Cancer PhD program, Student Symposium, that we typically run each year. So where do our graduates go? So you can see our graduates are really highly sought after. So we get a number that are going to China, also to different parts of Europe, and to the US, typically to postdoc. So really well sought after graduates. So we're now going to hold a student panel discussion where we'd love to introduce to you some of our current student committee. And we've been able to draw on some questions that were pulled that students have asked at the Inter-Institute Student Open Day. And we'll be able to ask them some questions. We'll then be running the Zoom drop-in sessions with the laboratories. And so there are 2 main sessions, and you can drop into as many of the labs to chat to the supervisors as you like, maybe just 5 minutes, maybe you want to stay longer, or for the entire time chatting to the one supervisor. But we'll now move on to have a little bit of a question time. So we might get Naranga to look at Menti, and Caroline and myself can answer some of those questions coming through before we'll move on to the student panel discussion.
So I'm just going to pick the top questions here. As a student coming from an undergrad degree with an interest in getting into research, I feel like I don't have the skills to work in a lab. Will I be provided with support in order to learn these?
Shall I answer, Erica?
Sure.
Yeah, give your voice a rest.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. Yes, the honours, no one assumes a student coming into the research area, even with a master's or something else behind them, actually knows everything they need to know. Even PhD students coming in are supported right from the start. So with an honours student coming from an undergraduate degree, we know you need training. You'll get some training through your university department work, which will be training you into the basics of doing some research, literature critiquing, etc. But you will be mentored by research assistants, postdocs, other students and your supervisors on how to do the actual practical work in your research. Whether it's in a clinical area or in a laboratory area, there'll be people there who will nurse you through to get you started and keep a close eye to make sure that you don't flounder and lose track. Everyone's aware that honours is a short program. A lot has to be achieved, so they will keep close eye and close support to make sure that you can meet the requirements as you go through and learn how to do research as you go.
The next question, for honours application, what are the minimum weighted average mark or the final mark requirement? And will past laboratory experience be considered in the application?
I'll take that one again as well, because I've done that one a few more times than Erica has. Officially, universities say a minimum of 65 for honours, but honours is really looking at people who can get the top marks. So in practice, it's more likely a minimum of 75. Most supervisors will be looking to see that someone doing honours is interested in a PhD maybe in the future, or even to be a research assistant in the future, has got a strong academic record that can help them do their research and develop as a researcher. The WAM takes the average over all 3 years. This year, the University of Melbourne, for example, are making a change to how they're calculating the WAM to allow for COVID. So we know that things like that will have impacted. But typically what departments will do is they may take the WAM, but they will also look at your third-year marks. Your supervisors will look at your third-year marks to see where are your strengths. If your strength is not in immunology, you maybe shouldn't be looking at an immunology project, for example. So they will try and match up your strengths with what their projects might need. The supervisors will definitely take into account experience in doing research projects throughout your degree. So that might tip you over the edge for someone else in them offering you a project. It's not actually taken into account by the university in their selection, I don't think, but it is sometimes a thing that will give you that extra bit of practice and experience that will get you into a lab that you want to get into.
We have 2 questions about the how COVID has impacted student recruitment. So one is asking, how has COVID-19 impacted honours students this year? And how do you anticipate this would impact 2021 honours projects? And also there's another question on how will this affect the PhD recruitment in 2021 as well?
Why don't well, maybe Caroline, you can answer this last one, and then I've just had to make note, we've only got 15 minutes left on this session. We'll compile a frequently asked questions sheet and we'll circulate that through. We do want to make sure that you get to hear from our current student cohort. So if you want to address this one, Caroline. And then
so the honours program has some students had delays in their practical work. Had to come out of the labs for a period when we withdrew everyone from the labs at the first start, and then gradually got back into the labs with modified projects, and many of them having a later deadline. So for example, we've got one student through through Australian Catholic University who has until February to finish his project. So extensions have been put in place for different projects and for different options. Some students chose to change their project into a dry lab one, doing more bioinformatics and analysis, or looking at it at a more theoretical perspective. Students were supported all the way through by their supervisors, by the system. Universities have taken it into account, and people in looking at honours marks next year will be taking into account the impact of COVID on results. With PhDs, we are hopeful that things will progress relatively normally next year, with people starting their degrees. At the moment, the main impact on anyone starting has been travel restrictions. We have people who have started their PhDs this year during COVID, but have started with the theoretical aspect, the planning, some preliminary writing. The main challenge is people coming from interstate or overseas in getting here due to COVID restrictions. We are hopeful that will change next year. Melbourne's coming out of our bad bubble, our bad virus bubble, so we hope that will happen. One impact with PhDs will be there'll be more demand on scholarships, because universities are having to support current students for longer with scholarships, and so it might impact on the number of scholarships that are available next year. But we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Ricky, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Just if I could add one thing to the first question about, what sort of help you would get. So I think there's a couple of points to that. The first is technical expertise, right? How to actually conduct an experiment using the technologies and the equipment That's one thing. But I think the beauty of research is that you change completely the way that you educate yourself. And, you're learning all the time. So you're testing a hypothesis, you get an answer, and then you have to really think about that result and determine where it's going to take you to answer the next question. It's this iterative process that builds and builds and builds. And you don't get that first up. It doesn't come, you're actually not taught that way through high school, primary school, and university, to be honest. It's a completely different way to think. And for many people, this is like a new world that's opening up. So be prepared for that. It's a very different way to think. And so we help students take that journey and to realize that, there's not just one answer to any single question. There's not always the right answer. And sometimes serendipitous results, things that just come out that you never expect, are the most exciting, the most impactful. So it's just a different world that you'll be entering. And it's one that will help you get through.
Okay, thank you so much. We've got lots of questions coming through, and we'll definitely compile a bit of an FAQ because there's a lot of questions about how to apply for the PhD and so forth. But we'll now invite our student committee panel to come in, and I'll have them introduce themselves once they enter. And I've got a list of questions, as I've mentioned, that have previously been asked by other students. And so I'm going to start off by asking each of the students to introduce themselves. And then I'll start asking them some questions. If you have some more that you want me to ask them, send them through Menti, and then we'll keep going until maybe 5:20, and then we better let you all out into the various supervisor Zoom sessions. So first of all, I'm just going to call out each of the students' names and have them introduce themselves just really briefly. So we'll start with Vicky.
Hey everyone, my name's Vicky. I'm currently a 1.5-year PhD student at Peter Mac. So I started at Peter Mac in my honours year a few years ago, and then I did my RA for a couple of years before commencing my PhD.
Great. We also have Lizzie.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm from the Netherlands, and I am almost 1 year into my master's.
And Shri.
Hi, I'm Shri. I'm a second-year PhD student, and I was an RA at Peter Mac for 2 years, and I started my PhD last year.
And last is Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack. I'm in my first year of my PhD. I started my honours 2 years ago, did a short stint as an RA, and then late 2019, that's when I started my PhD with the Cancer Immunology program.
Great. So we don't have any questions coming in yet, but we've got lots of great ones that we can ask you. So we might start with Shri. So how do you know someone's the right supervisor? How do you know by looking at their research projects?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that you have to take into account when choosing a supervisor. So I think firstly, you want to know what your research interests are. Like, you want to have a good idea of what you're interested in, and from that, looking at the research projects, finding something that like really speaks to your interest and something that you think you can be motivated to do for if you're doing a PhD. It's something that you're going to be doing for a few years, so it has to be something that you can sustain your interest in. I think also you want to think about the sorts of techniques that you want to pick up during a research degree. So if you're looking for an honours project, you want some techniques that will be transferable to lots of different types of areas of research, depending on whether you want to do further studies or whether you want to go get a job in a research field. So you want to think about that. I think it's also good to have a read generally of what your supervisor has done in their research career outside of just the projects that they're offering, and you can kind of get an idea of what their research interests are, the sorts of techniques that they tend to use, and from that you can get a good idea. But I think always it's really good to have a chat with your supervisor and see, see whether there's any flexibility in the projects that they're offering, and have a discussion there. I think also, I think it's also important to make sure that you are kind of on the same page as your supervisor, that you have like similar expectations of what you want to get out of your degree, and that you're able to kind of gel on a professional level with your supervisor as well.
So on that, a question come through Menti. What should you actually ask the potential supervisors during the first meeting?
Yeah, so I think firstly, you want to ask what sorts of projects that they have on offer and what their research interests are. I think secondly, once you've kind of got a gauge of the kind of research that they're doing, the kind of research that you have the potential to do, I think it's good to kind of ask about like what their expectations are for their students, I guess the amount of like hands-on support that you might be getting in a lab, who will be assisting you during your project. So whether you'll be getting assistance from like your group leader or like your PI, or whether it'll be from a postdoc or from technicians. I think that's, if you can get the opportunity to also talk to other people in the lab, I think that's a good way to find out about the lab culture. And I think different labs are different. Some lab heads are very hands-on and they'll spend a lot of time with you, like teaching you things in the lab. Other lab heads who are more senior faculty or who might have more staff, obviously they're not going to have as much time to have that hands-on time with you, so you might get taught more by other staff members. So I think also keep that in mind when you're looking for a lab and a project. Think about how you work best, whether you want to, I mean, obviously we're all aiming to be more and more independent through our projects, but if you feel like you would benefit from a lot of assistance and a lot of one-on-one time, or whether yeah, you would kind of like to be a bit more independent. So I think it depends on the individual, and yeah.
We might move on to Jack now. So you were previously a research assistant. So what was your motivation for pursuing a PhD, and how's it been different working, say, as a research assistant as opposed to, say, doing honours and now doing a PhD?
Yeah, so I mean, the reason why I wanted to do a PhD was I kind of saw it as I kind of see it as a challenge to really push myself and I guess sort of develop my skills and sort of repertoire in, I guess, research and science itself. And that's been, I guess, a huge motivating factor, I guess, further down the line when looking for, I guess, for jobs, which I guess is a different topic in itself. But in terms of the differences between being an RA and a PhD student, I guess being a PhD student, you guide your own project, of course, under your supervisor, so you get some guidance here and there. Whereas as an RA, it's less so about your project and more so about fulfilling what your supervisors want, particularly at a lower level. Not to say that there's, I guess, a negative to that, but the expectations, I guess, what they're expected of you are different there. In terms of transitioning between RA and PhD work, the good thing about being an RA prior to your PhD is that you do pick up a lot of skills beforehand, some that you might not have picked up during your honours here. And so that really does equip you with a better skill set to sort of launch you into your PhD. And I guess lastly, in terms of your working hours, I guess with RA, it's a little bit more regimented in the sense that you're on payroll, so you shouldn't really be there more than you need to. But of course, with your PhD, you'll be sort of working around your own hours and your own time schedule there.
Great. Okay, so I'm mindful that we have quite a lot of international students who've registered for this event. So I'd now like to move on to Lizzie. So you're an international student. What was the application process like as an international student? How did you navigate that?
Well, I think this opportunity to have this open day virtually and being able to speak to supervisors already is a great first start. So after I got in contact with my supervisors now, everything went quite smoothly through Caroline and Naranga and Erica, and they helped me every step along the way to get in contact with the university, and they told me who to speak to and how the application would go. And after that, everything went quite smoothly, and here I am.
Okay, wonderful. So we might move on to one of the questions on Menti, and I think Vicky can probably try and answer this one. That is, when you're doing honours, is there much of an opportunity to work with other students, or is it mainly independent work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think in honours, you're kind of on this short time frame where the project might be a bit more specific to what your supervisors kind of has in line for you. But I think there's always opportunities for yourself to kind of also see what your peers are doing and just kind of getting in conversation with them as well, and seeing whether you can kind of do smaller projects on the side that can also lead you to kind of answer the same questions that your supervisor might have for you. So I think with working with other students, it's really kind of taking your own initiative and just also having chat to your peers throughout the year to kind of open up those opportunities. So, but I think it's definitely there. It's whether, like, I guess how much you want to also work with other students. So yeah, but definitely I think those opportunities are available for honours students.
Okay, great. So we might move on to Shri. How much reading do you need to do as a student? And there's some tips for getting on top of the literature within your field.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is you can. I think there's no amount of reading that's too much to do as a student. I think in terms of keeping on top of the literature, I don't think anyone ever feels that they are completely on top of the literature, just because especially cancer research as a field, it moves so quickly. So there's always really important studies that are coming out. For me, I find that I try to, even if I'm not reading full papers in depth all the time, like I try to at least like have a skim read of papers and see what like the main findings of studies are. And I find when you start off with your research degree, often your supervisor will suggest some papers that are really integral to the project that you're doing, or some reviews. And from there, you can kind of find more reviews and find, through those reviews, find papers that are really important to the field that you're looking at. And I think it becomes a bit of a chain, like you'll read a paper which references another paper and you'll find more papers in that way. I think in terms of keeping on top of the literature, I actually find Twitter to be really useful. So there's a lot of researchers and academics who have Twitter accounts, and labs that have Twitter accounts, and they'll often share papers which they find really interesting, or things that they have published. I find that to be a really good way of seeing what other people are doing in your specific area of research. And it's a really good way of keeping on top of things. I think it's also really important to have a good system of organizing all your reading and all the things that you need to read and all the things that you have read, especially because you'll be writing a literature review at some point in your degree. So so using something like, EndNote, sometimes it crashes a lot. But EndNote, I've started using one called Paperpile, which is really, really good. Finding a kind of way of putting all your papers into folders, and so you can keep a track of what you've been reading. And
Great, thanks. We might see our director Ricky's maybe going to pop off like in a second, so if you see him disappear, don't be surprised.
Thanks, Erica, and I'll just say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for inviting me here, and I hope you enjoy the next session talking to all the supervisors about the wonderful projects that are on offer. Thanks, everyone.
Great. So I'm now going to ask a quick question to Caroline, because we're starting to get a few questions coming through about what's the difference between honours and masters, because they're looking through the student booklet and they're starting to see some are asking for one or the other.
So an honours program is a 1 year intensive, an 8-month intensive course, usually with the coursework finished starting in, say, February, finishing by May. And then the rest of the time is full-time on the research. Coming out of the research area about September in order to write up and submit by late October. So that's how much a project can fit in. A master's, there are two different sorts of masters. There's a master's coursework, and a master's coursework is usually a part-time research project, while students do over a two-year period. And students therefore can basically stretch out a project because they're only working in it part-time for some of that period. Typically, students will start with less time on the research at the start and then be full-time by the end. There's also a master's research degree, which is a shorter version of the PhD. It takes 1.5 to 2 years. PhD takes 3.5. Yes, and Lizzie's doing the master's, and she's trying to blitz it in the 1.5 because she wants to go on and do her PhD. If you do an honours degree is an undergraduate degree, and it is not the same as a master's. You then have to enrol in a master's degree and start from scratch. However, if you have done a project, most students here have, the ones who've done honours at Peter Mac, have continued on their project into an area that they've either done their honours or their research assistants into their PhD. So you can continue the same direction, but you are starting a new degree. In our booklet, we have some projects listed as honours and some as PhD or postgrad or honours masters. Don't tell the supervisors I said this, but basically ignore that, okay? Use the project as a starting point. I have had supervisors who swore they were never going to have an honours student, they were only going to look for a PhD student, but they ended up taking the honours student who came in because they liked the student and their background and they felt it would be a good fit for the project. So they modify the project. If it's an honours and it's 1 year, it will be a shorter project. Masters, they might be able to put in some extra things. If it's a postgraduate master's, research or PhD, they will add extra content to it. They will have ideas that can expand or shrink depending on the degree. So don't be caught up on whether it says honours, masters or postgraduate as a descriptor on the project. Just go for it anyway if you're interested in it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes for questions. I'm hoping I can quickly ask one more of Jack, Lizzie and Vicky. But then after that, as I've already mentioned, we will be contacting you. You can send through any frequently asked questions that you might have to us. But Lizzie has just mentioned that if there are any specific student questions, we could also pass them on to our current student committee and they can assist in answering those. So there may be things that we feel that we can't answer from a student perspective. As the education team, we'll definitely put those through to the students to answer some of those questions. So thanks for that suggestion, Lizzie. So for Jack, so one of the questions coming through from mentees, what does a typical week look like as an honours student? So how often would you spend in the lab? What's the commitment time? You know, how do you learn? Do you have lectures?
Yeah, so I can speak from the UniMel coursework. So for the first couple of months, you will have lectures to go to for a couple of subjects. So and this also really depends on what stream you enroll in, but you will have at least 2 subjects. One of them does require lectures and the other is a tutorial type setting where you'll, I guess, learn a bit about techniques and also a bit about how to analyze literature. And so those will take up, I guess, the greater half of the morning or afternoon on those days. And so for, I think of maybe around, I guess, 2 to 3 days per week in the first 2 months, you'll be spending half a day in doing classwork and half a day possibly in the lab, depending on what your supervisors give for you. Then there's other 2 days you'll be in the lab. And then once you've done all that coursework, which sort of wraps up about a third of the way through your honours year, then you'll be full-time in the lab. So once you're on full-time in the lab, it really depends on what your supervisor wants to do for you in terms of your learning and how fast you've learned. But for a typical week, you'd come in, start, say, 9 o'clock, and you want to finish ideally by 5. Of course, that really gets extended either way, depending on how much work you have to do. And you're pretty much just in the lab after your coursework. Then I'd say probably around the last month to half month, that's when you're going to be starting to write up for your thesis. And so you'll be spending more time, I guess, outside of the lab wrapping up and doing any minor experiments to sort of clean up your thesis by the end of that. Depending on how smoothly it goes, it doesn't always go that way, or sometimes it goes even better than that. So it does, I guess, long story short, it is quite variable. I think I said a bit of nothing there, but I guess be prepared to be in for full working hours, long story short.
Can I just add, realise that an honours is regarded as a full-time job for the honours period. You might come in on weekends if you need to do stuff. Times might be a bit flexible. So many students have had to give up like other jobs in order to be able to concentrate on their honours in order to fit in the time, because it can be a pretty intense year. Vicky's nodding her head there. Yeah.
I was just about to ask Vicky a similar question around that flexibility about working hours and so forth, but I think Caroline and Jack already touched on that. So there usually is a lot of flexibility, and you know, sometimes you need to come in at nights, but then if you need to start late, you can. So Vicky, instead I may ask you a question about imposter syndrome. So how do some of our students deal with imposter syndrome, and how can you manage that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very constantly nagging question as a scientist, especially as a junior scientist as well. But I think like the really important thing is just to kind of communicate with your supervisors and understand that if you do feel kind of stressed or vulnerable about your project, that you can talk to your supervisors, or if you don't feel comfortable, that you also have a mentor as well at Peter Mac, or other students that you can talk to. And I think the key thing is really just to be confident in your own skills, because you've obviously come into Peter Mac and you've been selected based on your merit. So you need to really remember that that's kind of what you're working off, and have the confidence to kind of believe in yourself. I know that sounds corny, but at the same time, like through that persistence, you're able to kind of get through that. And I think with also the great support network that we have from the research education team, supervisors, and other students, we can really help each other kind of push through it. So yeah.
Great. And that leads really nicely into my final question for Lizzie, which you're starting to touch on already. What other types of support are available to you as a Peter Mac student, apart from your supervisor?
Apart from our supervisors, every PhD or master's student will get a mentor who you can choose yourself, and that's not a choice you should take lightly, and that's a choice the student committee can help you with, because they've been around, they know everyone, they can tell you their favorites and their not favorites, and I think that's a really important relationship to have. And then there's obviously the student committee that can always help you if you have questions or any problems at all. And if we can't help you, then we'll 100% send you somewhere that could help you. And then lastly, there's obviously the research education team that can always help you when you're more like, we have a bit more serious issues with your supervisor, but that doesn't happen often. And I don't see that happen anytime soon, so I wouldn't worry at all.
Well, thank you so much to our student panel and to everybody else from the education team who has been here tonight. We do apologise that we weren't able to answer all of your questions. We had an awful lot of questions coming through Menti, which is a great sign, at least for us. As I mentioned, we'll pull together some frequently asked questions. We'll also get in contact with all of the students who have registered tomorrow. If you think of other questions along the way, send them through to us and we'll try and answer them for you, and we'll send you back a list of answers. And we'll also work with the student cohort here to be able to answer any of those that are more specific to the students. So we encourage you now all to log out of this webinar, click on some of those links for the various supervisors. They're all waiting for you. They've been expecting you for the last 8 minutes. Hopefully they're still feeling loved enough to stay on their Zoom links. And yeah, have a great evening. Drop in and chat to as many as you like. Thanks for everyone for being here.